Okay, okay, Nako. I like the idea, but can you do it right? Thank you to our final patrons, Strawbones, Red Wolf Horse 65, and a Midnight Gemlord. Now, if you're on this discussion on the chaos resurrections of dead characters from the 7 Deadly Sins, please don't forget to leave your own thoughts on who could be revived in the comment section down below. Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, when you're at that low notification, must miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do a Patreon down below. Each one for as low as $1 a month, including exclusive videos, early content, and more. You can also now become a member to the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Now, let's hop into the discussion. What's up, guys? I love the Pencil here, and the whole concept of Chaos Resurrections is something that, when they were first shown in the spoilers, which is crazy to think about all those months back at this point, I was admittedly a bit mixed. Though it does answer a major question I was wondering with this series and its pacing. So let's break it down. The main issue that I first saw with the series of 4 Nights and its pacing, I was wondering, how are you gonna really stretch this one out? Like, the original 7 Deadly Sins was over 300 chapters. You wanna know why? Because the world kept growing and growing and growing, but we kind of peaked. We kind of saw everything the world had to offer, for the most part, in the original 7 Deadly Sins. We got to see all 5 clans, all their different realms, to varying degrees, of course. But on top of that, we kind of killed 2 of the deities, so 2 big threats are gone, one in a movie and one in the original series, and all that left us with was Camelot and Chaos Arthur. And sure, that's a lot. Arthur could stretch the series out really, really long on his own, but in comparison to 7 Deadly Sins, which started off with a relatively small world that grew into a relatively big one, we're starting in a relatively big world that we already know a lot about, and we only have one real final villain. The great thing about the original series, well, the thing about the original series, whether it's great or not, people debate, is that everything that got introduced feasibly could exist in the original series. Mainly because the world started off from such a narrow perspective, especially with our characters literally being from 3,000 years ago. A lot of the past could come forward and haunt the future, like horribly, horrifically, darkly. And that led to the 10 Commandments and the Archangels and the deities and chaos. And with all that being the case, it allowed for the series to run on as long as it did, even if I think there are issues with how long it ran on in terms of how it paced out its content and stuff like that. But that's the thing, the original series had content to pace out. Now we have one final antagonist, and that's Arthur, and that's even if he's going to be the final antagonist. That was the other thing I feared. I thought that Nakaba was just gonna we're just gonna either A, speedrun the series, or B, make Arthur not the final antagonist, and I didn't like either of those options. I love the 7 Deadly Sins world, I love the 4 Nights world, I want to see more of it. And obviously, if we sped run Arthur with a character being way too strong and able to rival Arthur already, Lancelot, I love him, but man, does he break the plot right now, then we're gonna have a really short series, and I don't want that. But at the same time, I don't want there to be a Chaos Clan, or some aliens, right? Like, Dragon Ball is one of the few that did aliens well and expanded on it pretty well. Meanwhile, I don't know. I have so many mixed feelings about Boruto and how it did aliens, so I kind of don't want it. Even though Chaos itself is already an alien that kind of planted the seed of life on Earth. But whatever. Made Earth. So with that being the case, there's that possibility too. But the way that Nakaba decided to fix this, or at least slightly, it really depends on how much he uses it, is these Chaos Resurrections, bringing back characters from the previous series to tussle with our characters of this new series. And of course, this has mixed effects. Already with our first 2 Chaos Resurrections, I do think they kind of don't work, mainly because we had multiple characters who should have been able to one-shot them. Lance was there the entire time and didn't do anything, and I know, plot, but plot can only go so far. Meliodas could have literally one-shot them both with a trillion dark orb, one single trillion dark orb, and they both would have perished immediately. So him standing by and letting them destroy the kingdom, kind of whack. I get it, once again, plot. We can't have the old characters be useful, but then the old characters have to need to not be able to be useful, aka dead, and or they can't be in the general vicinity, aka Bon, Gother, Diane, King. They just aren't nearby enough to be useful, and that's okay. But by reviving the 2, Chaos Gallon and Chaos Molascula, in the general area of not 1, not 2, but three extremely powerful characters that, for all intents and purposes, should have been able to one-shot all of them before they did any real damage to the kingdom, and simply standing by and letting them annihilate whole chunks of the area, it's not really a good thing. But I think the Chaos Resurrection concept works specifically in the context of this new journey we're going on. Before, it was like, if we're going to limit ourselves to Leonis or dive straight into Camelot, it wouldn't make sense for Arthur to resurrect beings, because why bother? They're going to be either on your home turf, and or they're going to get one-shot by characters like Lance. And that's still a problem, but a problem for another time, or a problem later in this video. But what we can do now is have these natural roadblocks progress. We already started off pretty high. Like, unfortunately, already making our whole group to some degree commandment level, whatever you think, whether or not the Chaos Commandments are weaker than the original commandments, or the weaker commandments are actually the originals and the Chaos Commandments are stronger. Regardless, our cast already being relative to high level demons, which were a major threat for a hefty chunk of the original series, kinda leaves us with very few places to go in terms of people being revived that would actually be genuine threats. And this is where the problem of Lancelot comes in generally, because if he's already relative to King Arthur, no one King Arthur should revive should be a reasonable story thread. And while I can definitely see Nakaba force plotting it so that these characters don't just get one-shot by Lance for one reason or another, it's gonna feel forced. Like, especially with Lance being as strong as he is, unless Arthur's reviving beings that are stronger than him, which straight up doesn't make sense, or imbuing them with so much power that Lance can't help. See, this is kind of diving into a whole issue with Lance and how powerful he is relative to the rest of the group, because one way or another it's weird. But with that being the case, these Chaos Resurrections can be used to help the plot and pacing of the narrative. However, there's one problem I have with them already, and that it doesn't really explore their characters all too well. Like, Melascula and Gawain especially were reduced to pretty much their basic character traits and nothing else. Like, reviving characters that died already is kind of pointless if you're just going to kill them again. It just feels like a waste. But I get why you do it, to pace out the series further, but who's left? Like, as far as I know, Zeldris isn't dead. So there goes another high-level demon. The Knights of Black, at least in the canon timeline, never died. So I guess he could control them if they're still around, if Nakaba even remembers them. But if that's the case, they're still around, so he could hypothetically use them. But I don't see a reason, after starting off with Melascula and Gawain, that we would go backwards to Fraudrin, unless it's just a character thing. But even then, I don't think Dreyfus or Griamore are going to be very important characters, so the only characters who would have a genuine connection to Fraudrin just don't exist. So I don't see us reviving Fraudrin. I don't see us reviving Grey Road for any reason, because without their commandment, they're kind of fodder. Like, legitimately, all the four knights, even someone like Percy, should be able to manhandle Grey Road at this point, just being able to detonate Chaos Gallant at this already relatively, at least to what I assume Percy will be in the future, a relatively weak level. Percy, the self-admitted weakest of the four knights, should already be able to body bag someone like Grey Road without their commandment, which was the main thing that made them dangerous. Then that leaves what? Monspeed? Without Thetis traveling with the group, who, once again, I'm just assuming that Thetis is just in fact Derriere's reincarnation. That could just be wrong. I could just be tripping. But I think Nakaba's hinted at it enough, and they literally look exactly the same, just with a different hairstyle. So, without Thetis traveling along, no one's going to have a reaction to Monspeed. So, that's also pretty irrelevant. However, he is stronger. He is reasonably stronger than both Melascula and Gawain. So, Monspeed coming back as a power threat could be viable. But we're kind of in a rough spot of who to revive. Because Mael's still alive, so there's no Esterosa. I'm trying to think of characters that could really come back and pose a threat to our cast. Because unless Arthur has some sort of control over the Archangels in their reformation cycle, then he can't get them, because they're reforming. They will come back because they still have the graces. They died with their graces, so they'll just reform over time. So unless he's caught them, they aren't going to be able to be revived. A lot of the major powerhouses, either A, not dead, B, resurrecting slowly but surely, C, Mael, who is probably not going to work for Arthur unless Arthur forces him to, D, Meliodas, who's still alive, C, Elizabeth, who's also, I went from D to C, but regardless, Elizabeth, still alive, all the 7 deadly sins still alive. The only one I could see coming back is Escanor, and even then, he wouldn't have sunshine anymore, so he's not going to be all too powerful, even if he were to be revived, as cool as that would be to see Gawain versus Escanor. I don't know, we're kind of, in terms of characters that could be a relevant power threat, which is what we need at this point in the narrative to space it out, to chunk it out a bit more. It's very difficult to do. That only leaves beings like a Chaos original demon, I suppose. That could be revived, but even then, Lance should one-shot it. Chaos, the only thing I could hypothetically see happening, and they will be getting their own video, is a Chaos Supreme Demon King, or a Chaos Supreme Deity and a Chaos Demon King. Those are the only two I could see posing somewhat of a threat, specifically because of their magics. You can make a pretty solid argument that with Lance being able to box up and tussle with Chaos Arthur while still suppressed, he should be able to throw hands with them. But another story for another time. We'll talk about that at a later point. But that's the thing. The Chaos Resurrection concept was cool in concept, but considering a lot of our original characters that would have reactions to weaker revived characters will not be joining us on this journey. We just have a new cast, and while admittedly 2 of our new cast have memories, have experiences of these original characters in terms of Tristan and Lancelot knowing previous characters who died because of what Gother did and provided them the whole plot of 7 Deadly Sins. But with that being the case, power-wise, it's just not there. You kind of have to make new threats, especially with Lance roaming around, because you can't have anyone weaker than Lance in the narrative. But at the same time, you can't have anyone stronger than Lance in the narrative, because then everyone dies. It's a weird spot. The Chaos Resurrections are a really cool concept, but they can't really work all too well, because you can't do anything with them character-wise, because none of our characters will know them, and you can't do anything with them power-wise, because everyone's too weak. Or still alive. That's the biggest issue. By making everyone so powerful so early on in the series, and I mean from Percy and up, and it only gets up from Percy, the only characters who would feel threat from weaker than commandment tier revivals are the Percy platoon and the Tristan platoon. But once again, I don't see Percy and or Tristan just standing by and letting their human friends, their pure, weak, fodder human friends, throw hands on their own. They're just not going to do that. I could see Lance standing by. Like, hypothetically, if Amon Speed were to be revived, then maybe Lance would be like, hey, training session real quick. Y'all go grind against him. I'm going to watch. Make sure you guys don't die. Like, that's it. That's all I can see. Same thing if a Demon King were to get revived. Same thing if a Supreme Deity were to get revived. The only other cool thing that could hypothetically come out of these Chaos Resurrections is if the fusions compensate for their weakness. Like, Meligaland, a fused commandment, is already fodder to Demon Tristan. And Demon Tristan is fodder to base Lance. So, obviously, on a power front, they still shouldn't suffice. But a hypothetical fusion between the Supreme Deity and the Demon King should arguably be unstoppable. So maybe that could be a threat. But that's just one resurrection that you're already putting into a fusion. And then that's it. Nothing else can be revived that's powerful. Unless you want to argue that but that's the biggest issue. That is the biggest issue with these Chaos Resurrections. Lance breaks it. In a similar way that I talked about earlier in previous videos, that Lance breaks the plot, he breaks the whole Chaos Resurrection mechanic. Because everything in the series, unless Arthur was suppressed to a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of his power, which, at least to me, may be implied, we have to theorize on that. It's purely headcanon or not, on whether or not Arthur is suppressed to using specific portions of power. But with that being the case, with Lance being relative to Meliodas, who's already showing relativity to Arthur, the strongest being on the side of Camelot, you kinda can't use any previous series characters. The end of the series for 7 Deadly Sins is one of the hardest cases of power cliffing that I've ever seen. The only case that I can think of is, definitively worse is Magi. Because, Magi hard power cliffs by the end. The last 40 or so chapters of Magi snapped in terms of just how hard it power cliffs a lot of the cast. But 7 Deadly Sins is pretty bad too. By end of series, commandments are irrelevant. Archangels are irrelevant. And those are the 2 most powerful groups we have. Before pre-end of series, those were top dog groups. And now they're fodder. So no one you can revive from those groups or lower, if they're even available to be revived, are anything but fodder. So Arthur would literally have to juice them up with so much chaos at this point that you'd just be fighting Arthur again. So I don't know. I feel like Nakaba kind of jumped the gun on making Lance too strong, because if he was weaker, like, I'm straight up saying, the biggest issue I'm having as I'm thinking of this as I'm talking is that if you remove Lance, then hypothetically you can have more powerful threats in between, because sure, Tristan in demon mode is above a chaos fused commandment tier fighter, but at the same time you can still argue there are ranges above that. You can still argue, oh well, Galen and Belaskia fuse isn't that optimal of a fusion. It doesn't necessarily maximize their abilities the best. You could argue maybe with enough chaos juice, Monspeed could be stronger and Monspeed could throw hands with Demon Tristan and everyone falls beneath Demon Tristan. But the thing is, Lance is here. And I don't see, unless Nakaba is going to specifically go out of his way to plot Lance out of the narrative on multiple occasions, like he's been doing for a long time. Don't get me wrong, Nakaba's been very specifically removing Lance and or when he was Sin from scenario, specifically because he would break the plot. With Lance now being an active member of the group, unless a whole bunch of his power gets stolen or sealed away, like, I see nothing with Lance now being an active member. And see, Lance just invalidates the whole crew. Like, I was joking about this for a long time, but now, like, I'm actually thinking from a writing standpoint, and Lance is just too strong. He invalidates this entire concept. Unless it's like literal endgame bosses from this previous series, he invalidates the entire concept. No commandment stands up to Lance. No Archangel stands up to Lance, even if the Archangels could be used as chaos revivals. No humans standing up to Lance. Even previous Fairy Kings and Giants are not standing up to Lance. Like, I don't see Gloxinia beating Lance. So even a Chaos Gloxinia, like, Nakaba messed up. Now I know which video I'm recording. I think Lance literally broke the plot. Now that I'm thinking about it. But back to the Chaos Resurrection thing. The most interesting thing this can be used for, since we have gone over, it cannot be useful on the power front. Like, straight up, for extending the narrative on a power level front, not happening. Not happening because Lance is here. Lance is here, and he actually has control over his strength, unlike Demon Tristan. Once again, like I was saying, if maybe Lance wasn't here, you could argue the Knights are going to have to just grow more powerful or develop better control, because they can't rely on Demon Tristan without Lance being there to blow him up. Because Tristan will go crazy, and he's the strongest. He is the second strongest of the group. Sure, there's a wide margin between number 1 and number 2, but there's also a wide margin between number 2 and number 3. Like, the gap between Tristan and Gawain is quite palpable in terms of their maximum powers, at least from what we've seen so far. So with that being the case, we can't use it on a power front, but we can use it on a character front, and that's where it gets interesting. Bringing back characters could be very, very interesting just to see their reactions to the new world. Because sure, is the world all too different? Yes, like much, much more different. Like, I gotta imagine without the Supreme Deity and the Demon King being there, the Demon Realm with Zeldris as its king has to be entirely different. I want to see former commandments, former demons, explore the demon world, see how much has changed, do stuff like that. I want to see the goddesses that get revived, even though that's the thing, the goddesses just don't work. Because who's gonna revive? Nerobasta? Like, unless he's taking control over Tarmia, Ludishel, and Sariel, there's literally no reason for them to be under the control, because they died, quote unquote, but they're resurrecting through the graces. And Mael never died. So unless he takes control of them mentally through like mental hacks or something like that, we're not going to see any of the goddess realm being explored ever. I don't know. I just don't think we're ever going to see that. The celestial realm pretty much off limits unless Elizabeth dies and then we get it through her. That's why Melios and Elizabeth need to die, so we can get them as Chaos Resurrections. I need all the 7 deadly sins to get put in a pack, then so I can see them revived as Chaos people. So I can cry and eat my cake too. But regardless, cry and then cry again. Man, Tristan versus Chaos Meliodas would go heat. Lance versus Chaos Bomb would be heat. Gawain versus Chaos Escanor would be heat. Percy, I'm sorry, you have no parallel. To the original 7 deadly sins, you really have no parallel. The only parallel you have is in size to Meliodas. That's about all you got, kid. But the other three could have really cool thematic and character-wise fights in terms of if their parents got off. But right now, their parents are offed, so we're stuck out of luck on that front. But in terms of that, we could get interesting moments with human characters being revived. Like, admittedly, Zaratros already got brought back, but imagine seeing Zaratros, seeing his grandson, seeing Kion. That is his flesh and blood. Fortunately, it's still so hard to believe that Gilthunder and Margaret produced Kion, of all people, but it happened. That's him seeing his grandson for the first time. Imagine we get a Chaos Resurrection of Donnie's mom, since we never got to meet her. Like, she's a character that did not exist in Seven Deadly Sins. I've looked, I've checked the Carfax, I've checked the wiki, I've checked everything. I could not find Donnie's mom on a single panel of all the thousands of panels that are likely in original Seven Deadly Sins. Donnie's mom does not exist. So you could hypothetically get that. But you could see Anne's mom. If she's packed, I do believe Anne's mom is packed. I'm not sure if that's confirmed or not. Supposedly she may still be out there, but I do believe Anne's mom is packed, so we could see that. A lot of the interesting stuff will only come from a character front, because it's not going to be power. It's not going to be power. We're going to have to stall out the narrative character-wise, because with beings like Tristan and being like Lance, especially Lance being there, we cannot have a power front, but we can go wild with narratives. We can see characters being revived and having like an actual fight with Arthur over their own autonomy. Imagine seeing Gloxinia being revived and seeing the next generation in terms of Lance and be like, oh, you're a half fairy and a half human? That's great. I love it. And then he goes, something's in my yeah, it's Arthur. He's driving me mad. And then he fights it off because he's Gloxinia and he's the GOAT. And we just see Gloxinia hanging out with Dahlia, King, and they just all have a great time. It'd be wonderful. It'd be beautiful. I love it. But that's the thing. It's all depending on what Nakaba does. And here's why I think it won't work. Because he already killed Chaos Gaon and Chaos Molascula. Like, I have faith in the idea. I like the idea. But there's a reason I was like, in the intro, oh, it's cool if it's done right. But I don't think it will be. Because we got no interesting exploration of Gaon or Molascula's character. We have no interesting dichotomy of what they did. All they were reduced to meat puppets that had to die to show how strong people were. And sure, you can definitely argue that was Gaon's whole purpose in the original narrative. He literally just died to Escanor. But why bring characters back if you're just going to kill them again? The most interesting part of this is probably never going to be used, because I just don't think that's in Nakaba's... I can't say it's not like it's weird. Nakaba could do it. He's done interesting things with characters who were revived before. Zaratros was a good example of bringing a character back and using them well when he used it with Dreyfus and Gilthunder. That was a great usage of a revived character. Elaine gave us Lancelot. That's the only good thing I'll say about her character being revived. And obviously Meliodas is a constant talking about revival and coming back, and so is Elizabeth. And while I'm mixed on Elizabeth, Meliodas was obviously a good thing. So Nakaba can do good character work with reviving characters, just based on his first outing, and based on the limited choices he has. I don't see a whole arc centered around Anne and her mother, and that relationship that could exist there, and the relationship with Camelot. I just don't see it. Why? Because Anne's not one of the four knights. I don't see a whole arc for Donnie and meeting his mom again through a Chaos Resurrection, because one, I don't think Arthur would revive Donnie's mom at all, because he has no connection to her as far as we know. And two, it's Donnie. He's not one of the four knights. We probably won't see that. A lot of our cast doesn't have ties to the previous series in terms of our new cast. They just don't. Out of the limited pool, like we're drawing two circles here, and we're overlapping them to form a Venn diagram, out of the amount of characters that would all, A, be dead, because in order to be revived, you must be dead, and B, fall into a group of characters that our new main cast, our 11 cast characters, would care about, that circle's so small and so irrelevant that I don't think it would ever be used. I don't think the Chaos Resurrections would ever be explored in a very interesting way to what they could be. And of course, a big thing that I saw when the Chaos Resurrections first came out is this is dumb. Don't revive characters. And I agree. I'm very much, you kill a character, you kill a character. It's too late. You messed up at that point. If you want to do more with the character, you shouldn't have offed them. But since the door is being opened, since Nakaba is showing me a way, like he's being like, hey, I revived a whole bunch of characters in the previous series and killed your favorite one. Ha ha ha. But hypothetically, I could bring him back through this. I'm interested in just for that alone. Do I think it'll work on a narrative extending front on the power side? No, not at all. I think our cast is just too jacked at this point for any resurrections to be relevant on a power front, just through Lance alone, and even through the rest of our cast. Like I say, Percy, already stupid strong. Being able to just detonate Gawain from the inside with one tiny mini Percy. And that was before I think he even got another amp. Or it was after. Maybe, I'm not sure if it was before or after he got another amp. But that was already pre that, and he's already detonating solo Chaos Commandments. And obviously, Tristan, monster. Gawain, monster. Lance, the monster. I don't think power is going to work, but if Nakaba could grace us with a blessing, a true proper blessing, it would be interesting character interactions, interesting character development, interesting world development through the resurrection of those with such heavy ties to the past. Do I think it will happen? No. Two very interesting characters that could have had a whole bunch to do with the past that I'll talk about in a separate video were already revived as Chaos Commandments and then immediately got killed. So I don't think Nakaba will do it, but the potential is there. However, those are my thoughts. Please tell me what you guys think about Chaos Resurrections in the comment section down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure the notification bells to miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do a Patreon down below. Wings free for as low as $1 monthly exclusive videos, early content, and more. Thank you guys so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is That Guy with the Pencil, riding off.